will go on to explain the responsive interactions, classroom prevention practices, social and emotional teaching strategies, and the use of individualized interventions. So the best way I can describe the interactions in this classroom would be that they're very genuine. The teacher is always cognizant of children speaking to them, and they never give the impression that they do not have the time for the children. This goes with the assistant as well. The assistant is very caring towards the children. She's always lending an ear towards them. They know that they can always talk to her as well. It is obvious that the children always feel important because of the fact that the teacher listens to what they have to say. The teachers are very responsive to any conflicts that arise among students who are in conflict with each other. Students look to the teachers as a support for their development, and it is obvious that the teachers take that very seriously. I found that the teachers were able to sense when a conflict was going to come up, and they were able to squash the problem before anything significant happened. It was apparent to me that the teachers knew their students extremely well, which allowed for them to avoid any problems that may have occurred involving behaviors. I noticed that the teachers were always in close proximity to students when they could sense a problem might arise. They were always next to them, near them, watching them. They always knew what was going on. When students did have problems with other classmates or had problems they wanted to share with the teacher, she always made them feel important instead of brushing the child off as if their problems were not of importance. And she related to them in small ways so that the teacher knew she was listening to what they had to say. I viewed this as a responsive technique because it eased the child's mind and made them feel as though they were not alone and that someone understood their thinking. I noted that Mrs. Bolello was extremely well versed in prevention strategies because it was a challenge for me to recognize when she was even using them. Ms. Bolello really had to reprimand a student or explain to him or her that they were doing something wrong because she was always able to correct a behavior before the student realized they were even acting out. I became aware that she had a way of predicting a child would even act out. Before the behavior would occur, she was reminding all of the students of her expectations at that time, and that would usually prevent any unwanted behaviors from occurring. One specific classroom prevention practice that I noticed quite a bit was pairing or grouping of students. Students who she knew would not work appropriately together were not placed together. Ms. Bolello would make suggestions for students but was careful to make their decisions for them. She would say things to students such as, "Let's make good decisions for our partners so that we can all work together appropriately and be successful." And by saying this to the students, they understood the expectations and were more aware of their decisions. And they kind of they know that she has eyes on her back, so to say. They know she knows when they're doing something. They know it's not going to fly. I found that instead of correcting a wrong behavior, Mrs. Bolello would compliment an appropriate behavior, which would encourage the other children to act in the same manner, and this method seemed to work best with these students. I also liked Mrs. Bolello's method of allowing students to help other students who worked at a slower pace. Usually the students who helped their peers were the more academically advanced students and the ones who had more trouble not distracting others after they were finished working. By allowing them to help their peers, she was giving them extra learning opportunities and also giving them ways in which they could stay focused on academic activities. Mrs. Bolello encouraged social and emotional development constantly through her conversations with students on a daily basis. I observed both her and her teacher assistant always using specific positive feedback to children. Instead of telling the children, "Good job," she would say, "John, I love the way you used that word in your sentence." By telling the student exactly what she appreciated about his work, she let him know that she really took the time to read his work instead of giving him a generic compliment. Mrs. Bolello constantly kept the students engaged and involved in the classroom routine, and every day new roles were assigned for various classroom routines which the students loved taking part in. These classroom roles made students feel important and gave them an opportunity to take ownership in their classroom environment. I noted that I really enjoyed when Mrs. Bolello would include her classroom teacher during praise of a student. She would often ask the assistant, Mrs. Suzansky, I really love the way Tony was sitting and listening to me during that whole read aloud, don't you agree? And by including other teachers in praise of a student or recognition of a good behavior, she was allowing for students to understand that many people notice when they act appropriate in class and that there are always multiple people watching. It's never just your teacher. I noticed that Mrs. Bolello likes to brag about her students to other teachers, which lets the students know that she cares and appreciates their hard work. I also observed that instead of only having consequences for good behavior, both individual and as a class, um, when students make smart decisions for themselves, they are given positive rewards. And when the class makes smart decisions as a whole, they earn tally marks, which leads to positive benefits for them. Mrs. Bolello is very proactive in terms of individualized interventions because she is always looking ahead at how she can modify her lessons to fit her students better. She's always brainstorming with the classroom assistant on what they can do for new units and new lessons. She's constantly observing and assessing students during various parts of the day. She is highly in tune to their development, their needs, and is always planning for lessons that she feels would fit her students best. I have observed her contacting families for advice about a child's behavior inside the classroom, and she is never rude or disrespectful. I noted that she is always appreciative to the parents, and she always uses the parents as her best resource for how to educate the child more appropriately and effectively. Mrs. Bolello requests parents' input for behavioral plans because she knows that they are a vital resource in educating the child. She is able to determine when and why behavior may be occurring, and from there she's able to come up with various solutions to the problem, which seem to be effective the majority of the time. Instead of telling the student how he or she should work, she merely makes suggestions and allows the students to decide the best decision for themselves. And I think this holds students accountable because instead of just saying, well, Mrs. Bolello told me I should be doing this, so why don't I do this? She kind of gives them a suggestion like, I wonder if you could be doing this, or I wonder how this would work, and then they're able to make the decision for themselves. She takes the time to assess each child and their individual needs inside the classroom to determine what kinds of modifications are necessary for appropriate instruction. She is constant contact with the teacher assistant about new ways to engage students. Basically, in summary, I feel as though Mrs. Bolello is highly effective in her use of responsive interactions, classroom prevention practices, social and emotional teaching strategies, and the use of individualized interventions. I recommend that she continues speaking to the children on their level and shows them that she is interested in what they are saying because her students are clearly comfortable coming to her with problems and concerns. She uses great classroom prevention practices that usually allow her to avoid any misbehavior. Every once in a while, she has a distraction arise from a student, but she is able to determine why that occurred and prevent it from occurring. I would recommend that she continues to use her mini breaks that she gives the students after they have been working hard for a given amount of time. She often gives them stretch breaks or has little movement games that she plays with them that allow them to get their blood flowing and their muscles are able to be stretched before they continue working. Mrs. Bolello's social and emotional teaching strategies are so well implemented that it is tough to recognize when she's actually using them. I recommend that she continue to allow for students to do partner work and work in groups because this is encouraging their developmental growth and it is highly effective. All of her students are able to work successfully together during assignments. The only part of the TPOS system that Mrs. Bolello should focus a little more on would be the individualized intervention. I have noticed that with her ESE and ESOL students, she can sometimes become frustrated, so she oftentimes places those students with her assistant or with myself or other interns. I recommend that she reflects back upon her teaching to determine which areas of instruction are causing the students the most problems, which in turn cause her more frustration.